When the waiter brought the check, my mother-in-law announced to the entire restaurant, "Let her pay since she decided to show up to a family dinner without being invited." All 14 people at the table went silent. My husband stared down at his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. His sister smirked into her wine glass. His father suddenly became very interested in his napkin, and I smiled, pulled out my phone, and said, "Of course, Margaret, I'll pay. And while I'm at it, let me show everyone an interesting video from this restaurant's security cameras. You didn't know I own this place, did you?" Her face went white as the tablecloth. Her hand froze halfway to her pearls. The diamonds on her fingers caught the light as her whole body went rigid. For the first time in 8 years, Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you from the beginning how I got to this moment. How a woman everyone dismissed as not good enough played the longest, most patient game of her life. My name is Vera Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was married to David Whitmore for 8 years. 8 years of marriage. That's longer than most celebrity relationships, longer than my patience should have lasted, and definitely longer than I should have tolerated being treated like dirt on someone's shoe. I met David when I was 24. I was working as a waitress at a diner in Columbus, Ohio. Not a fancy place. The kind where truckers stop at 3 a.m. for coffee and pie, where the tips are small but the regulars know your name, where you learn to smile even when your feet are screaming and your back aches from carrying heavy trays. I was saving every penny, working double shifts, dreaming of something bigger but not quite sure what that something was. My mother raised me alone after my father walked out when I was 3. She cleaned houses for wealthy families until her back gave out, and then she cleaned some more because bills don't care about your pain. She taught me 2 things: work hard and never depend on anyone. I watched her come home exhausted every night, hands cracked from chemicals, and I swore I would build a different life. David walked in one night with some college friends. He was 27, finishing his MBA at Ohio State, confident in that way that boys with money always are. He flirted with me over pancakes, asked for my number written on a napkin, told me I was too pretty to be working in a place like this. I should have seen the red flag right there. Too pretty for this place. Like the place was beneath him. Like I was beneath him. But he was willing to make an exception because of my face. But I was young, and he was charming, and nobody had ever looked at me like I was something special before. So when he called the next day, I answered. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes. When he introduced me to his family 6 months later, I wore my best dress, a $40 find from the clearance rack that I'd altered myself, and practiced my smile and told myself that love could conquer anything. I was so naive. The first time I met Margaret Whitmore, she looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. She was wearing a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than my yearly rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her makeup was flawless. Everything about her screamed old money, even though I'd later learn the Whitmore fortune was only 2 generations old. She didn't say anything rude, not directly. She just asked questions. Where did I go to college? I didn't. What did my parents do? My father left when I was 3, and my mother cleaned houses until her back gave out. Where did I grow up? A trailer park outside of Columbus, but I didn't tell her that part. I said, a small community on the east side, and watched her mentally translate that into exactly what it was. With every answer, I watched her opinion of me drop. Her smile grew tighter. Her questions grew sharper. By the time dinner was over, she had already decided I was a gold digger, a social climber, a girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had somehow tricked her precious son into slumming it. She pulled David aside before we left. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. I was standing just around the corner, clutching my purse, heart pounding. She's not one of us, David. She'll never fit in. Think about what you're doing. Think about your future. Think about how she'll look at the country club, at business dinners, at family events. Is that really what you want? David told her he loved me, that I was different, that she'd see. She never did. The wedding was a disaster of passive aggression. Margaret insisted on planning everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, the menu, the music, the seating arrangements. My ideas were dismissed with a smile and a, "That's sweet, dear, but let me handle it." When I suggested daisies because they were my mother's favorite, Margaret laughed and said, "Daisies are for roadside memorials, not weddings." My mother wasn't seated at the family table. She was placed in the back, near the kitchen, at a table with distant cousins who didn't know anyone either. When I tried to protest, David said it was just easier not to fight his mother on the small stuff. Small stuff. My mother's place at my wedding was small stuff. My friends from the diner weren't invited at all. Limited space, Margaret explained, even though 300 guests somehow fit just fine. On my wedding day, surrounded by people I didn't know wearing clothes I couldn't afford, I had never felt more alone. But I told myself it would get better. Once we were married, once I proved myself, once she saw how much I loved her son, it would get better. It didn't. For 8 years, I was the family punching bag. Every holiday, every dinner, every gathering was an opportunity for Margaret to remind me of my place. Thanksgiving, first year. "Vera, sweetie, maybe next time let me handle the pie. Baking is more of an acquired skill." Christmas, second year. "What an interesting dress. So brave of you to wear something so unique." Easter, third year. "David tells me you're still working at that little cafe. How industrious." 4th of July, fourth year. "Vera, perhaps you should let Amanda handle the hostess duties. She has more experience with these things." She'd comment on my clothes. "Interesting choice, Vera." She'd correct my grammar in front of everyone, even when my grammar was perfectly fine. She'd ask about my little job with air quotes, like working was something embarrassing. She'd compare me to David's ex-girlfriends, all from good families, all with the right education, all so much more suitable. And David never defended me, not once in 8 years. He'd sit there with that same expression he had at the restaurant, eyes down, mouth shut, waiting for it to pass like a storm he couldn't control. "That's just how she is," he'd say later when we were alone. "She doesn't mean anything by it. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. If you just tried harder to get along with her." Too sensitive. I heard that so many times I started to believe it. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should just try harder to fit in, to be better, to be worthy of these people who made me feel worthless. His sister Amanda was no better. She was 2 years older than David, already on her second divorce, and she treated me like the help. She'd hand me her coat without asking. She'd send me to fetch drinks. Once at a family barbecue, she actually snapped her fingers at me and said, "Vera, be a dear and get me another wine." I got her the wine, because that's what I did back then. I swallowed my pride and smiled and pretended everything was fine. Now, before I continue with this story, I want to take a quick moment. If you're enjoying this so far, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love reading your comments. It means so much to know that people all over the world are listening. Okay, back to the story. The turning point came 3 years ago. I was working at a small cafe at the time, managing the front of house, learning everything I could about the business. The owner, Rosa, was a 67-year-old woman who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and a family recipe for the best tamales in Ohio. She had built the place from nothing, started with a food cart, then a tiny counter service spot, then finally the cafe. She reminded me of my grandmother. Tough, practical, full of wisdom she shared over cups of coffee after closing. One night, I was crying in the back room after another brutal family dinner. Margaret had announced to everyone that I was finally learning to dress appropriately, like I was a child who had just learned to tie her shoes. The whole table had laughed. David had laughed, and I had smiled and excused myself to the bathroom and cried silently in a stall for 15 minutes before coming back to finish dinner. Rosa found me in the storage room, sitting between boxes of napkins and coffee filters, mascara running down my face. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down next to me on an overturned crate, her knees creaking, and waited. "I don't know why I stay," I finally said. "I don't know why I keep trying." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Mia, you know what's the best revenge? It's not screaming, it's not fighting, it's not proving them wrong with words. Words are cheap, and people like that don't listen anyway. The best revenge is building something so big, so successful, that one day they have to look up at you, and then you smile and wave from the top, and you don't say a single word. Because you don't have to." That night, I went home and made a decision. I was done crying. I was done trying to earn approval that would never come. I was going to build something of my own. And I was going to do it so quietly that nobody would see it coming. I started small. I saved every dollar I could from my paychecks. David never paid attention to our finances. He just assumed I spent everything I earned on groceries and clothes and girl stuff. He had no idea I was putting away $500 a month into a separate account, an account he didn't know about, an account my grandmother's voice in my head had told me to open years ago. Always have your own money, Vera. Money nobody knows about. Money nobody can take. I took online courses in business management, accounting, marketing. I watched YouTube videos about restaurant ownership. I read books about successful entrepreneurs. I studied everything I could about the industry, while David thought I was watching cooking shows. 2 years ago, Rosa decided to retire. Her children had moved to California, and she wanted to be near her grandchildren. She offered to sell me the cafe at a price that was practically a gift, half what it was worth, with flexible payment terms. "You remind me of myself," she said, pressing the keys into my hand. "Hungry, determined, underestimated. I want to see what you can do with this place." I took out a small business loan. I used every penny of my savings. I signed the papers with shaking hands and became a business owner for the first time in my life. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell anyone. The cafe became my secret, my sanctuary. I worked there early mornings before David woke up, late nights after he went to sleep. I hired Rosa's niece, Maria, as manager to run the day-to-day, so I could stay invisible. When David asked where I was, I made excuses. Errands, visiting friends, helping at the community center, doctor appointments, anything. The cafe did well, better than well. I kept Rosa's recipes but modernized the space. I added a loyalty program. I partnered with local offices for catering. Within 6 months, I paid off my loan. Within a year, I opened a second location across town. And here's the thing about success. It's addictive. Once I proved to myself that I could do it, I wanted more. Not for the money, not for the status, for the feeling of building something that was mine, something that nobody could take away from me or belittle or dismiss, something that proved I wasn't worthless, even if only I knew it existed. Every time Margaret made a snide comment, I'd think about my 2 cafes and smile. Every time David dismissed my opinions, I'd remember that I had employees who respected me, customers who appreciated me, a business that proved I was capable of more than anyone in that family would ever know. 18 months ago, I learned that the Montgomery was for sale. The Montgomery, the most upscale restaurant in the city. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, a wine list thicker than a novel, a 6-week waiting list for Saturday reservations. The kind of place that made you feel special just walking through the door. The place where the Whitmore family celebrated every birthday, every anniversary, every achievement. Margaret's favorite restaurant, her throne room. When I saw the listing, I felt something I can only describe as fate. Like the universe was handing me an opportunity wrapped in a bow made of pure justice. The price was astronomical, way beyond what my 2 little cafes could afford. But I had learned a few things about business by then. I had learned that you don't always need all the money yourself. You need a good plan, a solid track record, and the ability to convince others to believe in your vision. I found investors, two women who had built their own businesses from nothing and understood exactly what I was trying to do. I negotiated terms that made sense for everyone. I put together a deal that worked on paper and felt like poetry in my soul. 3 months ago, I signed the papers. I became the owner of the Montgomery, and I waited. I kept everything exactly the same. Same staff, same menu, same reservation system, same white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers. The only change was in the back office, where the ownership documents now bore my name. Nobody knew. Not the staff, not the customers, not David, and definitely not Margaret. I installed new security cameras throughout the restaurant, high definition, with perfect audio. I told the staff it was for insurance purposes, which wasn't entirely a lie, and then I waited some more, patient, quiet, like a spider in the center of her web. I didn't have to wait long. Last month, Margaret made a reservation for her book club. 12 women, private dining room, 3 bottles of expensive wine before the appetizers arrived. The cream of Columbus Society, or so they believed. I watched the footage later that night, and what I saw made my blood boil. Their waitress was a young woman named Emily, 22 years old, working her way through nursing school, supporting her mother who was undergoing chemotherapy. She picked up every shift she could. She never complained. She was one of my best employees, hardworking, kind, the sort of person who remembered regulars' names and asked about their families. Margaret didn't see any of that. Margaret saw a servant, an inferior, someone who existed only to serve her needs. When Emily accidentally brought the wrong wine, a 2018 instead of a 2017, a mistake so small it was virtually undetectable, Margaret exploded. She called Emily incompetent. She called her worthless. She said she was too stupid to carry a tray. She threw a cloth napkin at her face. She demanded to see the manager and threatened to have Emily fired, blacklisted, unable to work in any decent establishment in this city ever again. Emily stood there and took it. She apologized over and over, her eyes filling with tears, her hands shaking as she tried to correct the mistake. Her voice trembled. Her face went red with humiliation. And Margaret laughed at this young woman's tears. Her book club friends laughed too, tittering behind their manicures like they were watching dinner theater. Entertainment. A girl's humiliation was entertainment. I watched that footage 17 times. Each time I felt the same thing. Cold, focused rage. This woman had spent 8 years making me feel worthless, and she treated everyone she considered beneath her exactly the same way. The waiters, the housekeepers, the gardeners, anyone who served her, anyone who couldn't fight back. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Margaret was simply cruel to anyone she thought was powerless. Well, she was about to find out that one of us wasn't powerless anymore. I planned the moment carefully. The family had a dinner scheduled for David's father's 70th birthday. 20 people, the main dining room, a celebration worthy of the Whitmore name. I RSVP'd through David, of course. He didn't even think to question whether I should come. I was his wife, after all. Even if I was an embarrassment, I was expected to show up and smile and pretend everything was fine. That was my role. That had always been my role. On the night of the dinner, I dressed carefully, not flashy. I'm not Margaret. I wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry I owned that meant anything. Comfortable shoes because I knew I might need to make a quick exit. I arrived at the restaurant like I had dozens of times before. The hostess greeted me by name, not knowing that I signed her paychecks. The manager nodded politely, unaware that I had approved his raise last week. I walked through my restaurant, past my employees, into the private dining room where the people who had tormented me for 8 years were gathered to celebrate themselves. The Whitmore table was in full glory. Margaret at one end, resplendent in diamonds and self-satisfaction. David's father, Harold, at the other, looking uncomfortable in his suit and tie. David beside his sister Amanda, who was already on her 3rd glass of wine. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, all the people who had watched me be humiliated for years and never said a word. And there was one empty seat. For me. At the very end of the table. As far from the important people as physically possible. Next to a great aunt who was mostly deaf and a cousin's teenage son who spent the entire evening on his phone. I took my seat without complaint. I smiled. I made small talk. I complimented Margaret's dress. I told Harold happy birthday. I played my role perfectly, and I waited. The dinner proceeded exactly as expected. Margaret dominated every conversation. Amanda made a snide comment about my department store earrings, my grandmother's pearls, the only thing I had left of her. David's cousin asked if I was still doing that little coffee shop thing. I answered politely. I laughed at the right moments. I was the perfect invisible guest. Then the check came. It was placed in the center of the table, as it always was, and Margaret, as she always did, made her announcement. "Let Vera pay," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, since she decided to show up to a family dinner without being invited. The table went silent. Without being invited. I looked at David. He didn't meet my eyes. He had told me about this dinner. He had asked me to come. And now he was letting his mother say I had shown up uninvited, like a stray dog at a picnic. Amanda smirked. Harold looked embarrassed. The cousins exchanged glances. The teenage boy actually looked up from his phone, sensing drama. And something in me clicked into place, like a key turning in a lock, like all the pieces of an 8-year puzzle finally coming together. I smiled. "Of course, Margaret," I said calmly. "I'll pay." I reached for the check. Everyone relaxed. Just Vera being Vera, taking the abuse with a smile. Good old reliable doormat Vera. "But while I'm at it," I continued, "let me show everyone something interesting." I pulled out my phone, connected to the restaurant's display system, my system, because I owned it, pulled up the security footage from last month. "You see, there's something I've been meaning to share with the family." I pressed play. On the large screen in the dining room, the one usually used for birthday slideshows and anniversary videos, Margaret's face appeared, screaming at Emily, throwing the napkin, calling her worthless, laughing at her tears. The room went absolutely silent. 20 people frozen, watching Margaret Whitmore at her ugliest. "That young woman," I said, my voice steady, "is a nursing student named Emily. She works here to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. She has a 3.9 GPA. She volunteers at the Children's Hospital on her days off. She is one of the kindest, hardest-working people I've ever met." Margaret was sputtering. Her face had gone from white to red. Where did you... Who authorized this? This is illegal. I'll sue... "I authorized it," I said, "because I own this restaurant." The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I've owned the Montgomery for 3 months. I've also owned 2 cafes in town for the past 2 years. Businesses I built from nothing while everyone at this table treated me like I was nothing. I stood up slowly, straightened my dress, made eye contact with every single person at that table. "You, Margaret, are permanently banned from this establishment. If you attempt to enter, you will be escorted out by security. Your name has already been removed from our reservation system. Every restaurant I own, and I plan to own more, will be closed to you forever." "You can't," she started, her voice shaking. "I can. I did. It's done." I turned to David, my husband of 8 years, the man who had never once defended me, the man who had let his mother call me uninvited to my own family dinner. "I'll have divorce papers sent to your lawyer on Monday," I said. "Don't worry, I don't want anything from you. Not the house, not the cars, not a single cent. I don't need it. I have my own." His mouth opened and closed. No words came